I have a few Boston Marathon experiences. It wasn't really supposed to be like that. I just figured that Boston would be a one and done kind of event, tick the box and move on. My first problem, I chose 2004 for my first Boston. This, I think, we'll find out from Mark, but this, I think, was one of the hottest Boston marathons on record. Certainly the finishing area looked like a war zone when I got there, with people suffering from heat stroke, me included. And this kind of meant that I had some unfinished business with Boston. But I resisted going back there. It's quite a sort of an organizational event for me to do that. But then after the 2013 bombings, I signed to go up again in 2014. As people said, if you think you can intimidate runners like that, then you pick the wrong group of people. I was very much of that school of thought, like, screw those guys, I'm going back to Boston and show them. After that, I was hooked and I started to go every year until 2018, when I kind of got unhooked. That was, if you don't know anything about 2018 Boston, that was, I think, the coldest, wettest, windiest marathon ever done in the history of marathons in the world. It was quite biblical in terms of conditions. However, I did beat almost all of the Kenyans and the Ethiopians because they all dropped out. So now I think it's probably time to go again. So I'm entered for 2024 and looking forward to all the advice from today's book. Hi, and welcome to the Running Book Reviews podcast, where we review books written for runners, by runners, and about runners to help you decide if you'd like to read the book for yourself. We also hope that listening to us chat about running can help keep you motivated about your own running and maybe inspire you to try something new or different. My name's Alan, and with my co-host Liz, we're going to talk today with author Marc Pollina about his book, The Boston Marathon Handbook.
The Boston Marathon Handbook is part of the Falcon Guides series. I didn't know what the Falcon Guide series was, but the little blurb on their website says Falcon Guides cover the entire spectrum of outdoor activities. Our objective is to outfit your mind with the best information on where to go, how to get there, and what to see once you arrive. And actually, the Boston Marathon Handbook is exactly that. This book covers everything about Boston, from what makes Boston so special to getting in the training and what to do after the race and more. There are 12 chapters that make up the book, and it starts with why is the Boston Marathon special? And then it ends with Boston Marathon Lexicon. So Mark explains all of these strange terms that you might hear while you're in Boston or getting ready for it. A little bit about the author. Marc W. Pollina is a writer, runner, and entrepreneur. He has completed 26 marathons, including 18 Boston marathons as a bandit, a charity runner, and a sub-3 qualifier. Maybe he'll talk to us about how he qualified with sub-3, because I want that sub-3-hour marathon too. Pollina earned a BA in English Literature from Hampden-Sydney College and studied digital transformation at MIT. Mark survived a near-death childhood accident, recovered his soul from the cold grip of the financial services industry, and founded an innovative cyber media startup prior to penning his nonfiction debut. Wow, what a resume. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thank you so much for having me. I am huge fans. I think that anybody who is a runner is a friend of mine right off the bat, and anybody who loves books is a fan of mine right off the bat. But you do both, and you have a podcast that celebrates authors. So really, you're at a whole nother level. You're like deities to me.
We're a triple threat.
That's amazing. We're like already friends.
If I didn't see you in front of me right now on this virtual call, I would think you're just some apparition of some sort.
Well, there you go. We're all feeling pretty good about ourselves now.
That's fantastic. So I guess the first question that we always ask is, how did you decide to write this book? Because obviously writing a book is quite the process.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always been, a lifelong writer, if you will. But it all started, funny enough, back when I was 14, long ago, when there was a book that came out that you may or may not be familiar with called The Official Preppy Handbook. This was a book written by Lisa Birnbach. And long story short, it was all about this culture, this institution, if you will, of preppiness. And Lisa Birnbach had this incredibly whimsical, tongue-in-cheek type style of writing that I just fell in love with. So I put that book in my backpack and I carried it around, and it was dog-eared. It was my
Wow.
Bible. So at that point, I was 14. I said, I'm going to write a handbook like this about something that I know intimately before I die. And okay, so that was age 14. I didn't know anything about anything. If I did know something, it was baseball, because I grew up with a batting cage and a pitching machine in my backyard. I wanted to go
Oh,
play.
wow.
I actually played high school baseball against Deion Sanders. I don't know if you know who Deion Sanders is. But my journey to the book was I moved to Boston in 2000. And unbeknownst to me at the time, it was about a few blocks away from Heartbreak Hill, which
Oh,
I
wow.
just thought was another little polite, little cute hill in the neighborhood that I loved. And then I found out it was the hill, the most famous hill. And I went in 2001 to watch the race, and I watched them just float. And I mean, the lead pack floated up the hill at like 445 clip. And I was mesmerized. And I was looking for something after I left college, because I played baseball all the way through college. I was looking for something athletic, that I could do, because I have this wired in my DNA to train for something. And I fell in love with running. So I decided I would run the Boston Marathon, ended up running it multiple years. And it was about a year and a half ago that, after running 18 Boston Marathons, I sat back and said, I think I have enough knowledge around this thing that I love and I know intimately to write a handbook about it. And that's when I started writing. It was really exciting, because there are a lot of books out there about the Boston Marathon, but they typically fall into two camps. One is memoirs, right? So you have Des Linden's
Mhm.
Choosing to Run. Fantastic
Yep.
story, incredible personality, great book. But also memoirs like the Boston bombing, written by Jeffrey Bauman, and that type of thing. The other camp is typically, you've probably seen some of these books, historical accounts, right? So that could be Tom Derderian's Boston Marathon, every race in great detail since 1897, or it could be something related to a particular incident like the bombing in 2013. I wanted to take a different, tack, and I wanted to have this Bible-like thing that would be an heirloom in the hands of a runner, that they could pass on to their children or give to a loved one after their running career was over, type of thing. So it took about a year and a half to put it all together. I wrote it in about a year. It took another half year to get all of the contributors on board and get their quotes and everything like that. And then, of course, getting an agent, and certainly getting a publisher. It was a marathon in and of itself. But then the book has been out since February 6th. So it's pretty exciting to see it out in the world.
Wow.
That's great. And also the timing is perfect for this podcast, because if people are listening to the podcast after it just releases, Boston's just around the corner.
Yep.
15 days.
Maybe the first thing we'll dive into, because most runners know the Boston Marathon, or have been trying for years to qualify for the Boston Marathon. And you mentioned that, we all think, well, when we qualify for the Boston Marathon, it's that list of qualifiers. You take your age, if you're a male or female, and you have a time that you have to achieve. And you have to run faster than that time, because in recent years the cutoff has been like 5 minutes, or I think the last one was like the biggest cutoff that's ever happened. It was over 5 minutes. But you actually mentioned in your book that there are other ways to qualify for the Boston Marathon. So can you explain what people can do if they didn't qualify?
Yeah, great question. And I do answer that in the book. And the answer is complicated. as far as qualifying, there is one way to qualify, and that is to qualify, right? So can you run the Boston Marathon and not qualify? And the answer is, of course, yes, right? So typically, there's 80% of the field that are qualifiers, and then the other 20%, roughly, are charity runners. But there are ways to get bibs beyond those two camps, right? So one of them would be to know somebody in the Boston area. Typically, the best way to do it would be to know somebody within government in the city of Boston. They tend to get bibs and hand them out sometimes to charities, but oftentimes to individuals. Brands have bibs and are allocated bibs as well. There are also, it's probably 2% of the field that finds an alternative way, a screen door, if you will, to get into Boston.
Yeah, I just didn't know before reading this book. I didn't even know that that was a
Yeah.
possibility. Like, I figured it was like, well, charity, or you either have to raise like a whole lot of money, because some of those charities, they require, I mean, it's a lot of money you have to raise, or you got to qualify.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Yeah, when I started running with a charity, you'd raise $2,500 to $3,000, and now those numbers are, in most cases, north of 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
That is substantial. And you think about,
For me, it's easier to try and run the qualifying time than it is to raise that amount of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money to raise.
I do make I describe in the book 10 charity personas, and one of the personas I throw out there is the checkmate. And the checkmate is a specific person on your charity team who, if you look at a charity team, the way they raise money, they have these online sites where you can see, oh, well, so and so raised 10,000 and they're almost close to their goal, et cetera. And you look at the bottom of the list, you'll see some people, not many people, but some people just have zeros. And you're wondering, how are they going to, because if you don't raise that money, the charities will, in a sense, come after you for that money. So they want the money because it does so many great things. It's not just about a money grab. It's about doing great things, curing cancer, et cetera, supporting programs. But that particular person, that is the checkmate, would have a zero because they typically just stroke one check at the end.
Okay, they write their own check, basically.
Right, checkmate.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that kind of fascinated me, probably because I don't understand a lot of the deep history of Boston, was bandits, because it seems like in the modern day, you can't go doing that anymore. Especially since, I don't know, COVID and 9/11 and security and the bombings. You can't go sneaking into the race. That seems like a big no-no these days. But it appears that in the past, I don't know, 30 years or more past, quite a lot of people used to bandit the race in terms of saying, well, I'm a runner, I don't have to pay to run, I'll just jump in. And there seems to have been a history in Boston of that sort of practice or malpractice. You included.
I make the point that it's really woven into the culture of the Boston Marathon, and deeply. I say that it's really the bandits, kind of the seeds of this mighty oak from which grew concentric layers of this massive institution that we all love. And it's true because looking back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you'd have this crazy uncle who bandited the race, and you'd hear about it. You'd be like, no, that's crazy. Uncle Ed did that. and then it would be in the back of your brain. And then you would end up going to college. Maybe you went to Boston College, and there you are in Boston College. And then your crazy roommate says, hey, I'm going to go run the marathon on Monday. And you're like, are you crazy? Like, I'm not going to do that. But then you end up doing it. So you have these stories that are legendary in families, littered all over Boston. And those are really the seeds of what grew not only the runners, because some of them would end up becoming charity runners, and those charity runners would end up keep running, and they would get faster, and they would become qualifiers. But here's the most important part of it. The most important part is it took these bandits who were littered all over the Boston community. It made the crowds more intimate as a result, because they too knew the crazy Uncle Ed. And those crowds were not only knowledgeable about the race, but they were there in force, no matter what the weather was, whether it was perfect chaos of 2018 or the crazy heat of 2004 you just described. They show up. It's like it's almost like the Kentucky Derby, right? It's this statewide party on this holiday called Patriots Day. And banditing was, again, the seeds of that happening. But to your point, it is verboten. It is not something that is encouraged today. It's changed a lot. Do people bandit it today? Yes. Are there as many as what used to bandit? Absolutely not. And it's discouraged more and more. And that, to your point that you said about 2013 and all the security, it makes it even more difficult today than it was before.
Yeah, because I mean, the only Boston I ever did was 2011. And I remember, like, even in the corrals, like there were like corral police, like they didn't let you in the wrong corral. So I couldn't even imagine somebody like getting in without a bib because they were, I mean, it was just hard. It felt like everything was closed off.
Yeah, they do have the bib police in every corral. The thing is, once you get going and you're in the race, the good news is they're not going to pull you off the course. They truly aren't. Even if you were injured in whatever way, shape, or form and needed medical attention and you went into a medical tent, they would absolutely help you. And for that reason, in the book, I say, if you do, do this thing, if you bandit it, and you really might have some issues if you do, but if you do, there are certain rules around what you should do. And you should always put your information on you somewhere. So if you collapse, medical personnel can help you and they know who you are, because each runner that has a bib and has paid, they have that information on the back of their bib. So it behooves you to figure out a way to impart that information to somebody who's trying to save your life.
That's a good point, actually.
I guess you'd probably also get a lifetime ban from being an official entrant if you do it these days.
Correct. If you're caught, absolutely. The BAA makes it very clear if you were to do that, and that is a consequence. That is a potential consequence to be banned from all races, and not just the Boston Marathon, but anything the BAA hosts.
We talked about, the variable temperature in Boston. And, Alan and I, we live in Canada, so we have winter, and Boston is very early in the spring. It's April. So for us to train for a marathon, even if you do like a 3-month training plan, well, you're starting in January, which is not very nice. And so I like to do pace workouts on the treadmill, but you actually say something about treadmills in your book. So on page 113, it says, "Did you know that treadmills were first popular in prisons and they were used as a form of punishment for inmates?"
I can believe that. I won't go anywhere near a treadmill. I firmly believe that they're still a torture device.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to admit publicly, I love the treadmill because it's warm, it's inside. I can wear shorts when it's January. And so I guess my question is, like, what does that say about me?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think, I'm with you, actually, Liz. I have a love-hate relationship with the treadmill. I don't quite love it as much as you do, but it has its purpose, right? So, I am in Boston. It's not quite Montreal, but that being said, if you need to get speed work in, if you really truly want to run your PR, if you want to BQ, want to be a PR, and you're trying to do your best, then it's very difficult to do that in the beginning of April or mid-April without speed work, right? And there are some winters, where it's impossible to get outside on slippery surfaces, snow, ice, black ice, and get that work in, unless you have access to an indoor track, which not everybody has. So I think, what it says about you is you're dedicated, right? I mean, if you weren't, you'd be like, oh, it's okay. I'll just, I'll take it easy today. I'll go outside and I'll do my little run, but I won't worry about pace. But it takes a different person to embrace the treadmill and actually get the work done.
Okay. Oh, that's more positive than I thought your opinion of me would be, but
I'll say one more thing. The treadmills
okay.
of today are
Mm-hmm.
quite different than the ones that were in the prisons, right? So the
Yes.
ones today are connected. You can run against other people. You can run in Paris. You can run the Boston Marathon course. They have virtual Boston
Yeah.
Marathon course, right? So it's actually pretty dreamy.
It is
um,
actually. I have
Mm.
a friend that has a treadmill, and she like, I don't know, she tours Paris when she goes for her run and stuff, and she loves it. But the ones I use are a little bit more like the prison ones, so
yeah,
it's really about the getting that marathon pace in, because I just feel so much more confident when there's marathon pace that was actually done. Rather than, like, I know outside you can train by effort. But I just don't enter the race with the same, I guess, knowledge of, what's possible, because I haven't
right.
run that pace
Yeah.
since,
But
the year before.
personally, I think if you're training for a marathon hard for Boston because you want to do a PR, generally forget it because you're not doing a PR at Boston. You can do if it's your first ever marathon, you get a PR, I guess. Or if it's your first ever Boston, you'll get a Boston PR. And you can try to run for a Boston PR, but my view is forget the overall PR because the Boston Marathon course is not very conducive to that. That's certainly my personal view. Like if you're going in going, oh, maybe I've done Chicago a few times. I'll try to better my Chicago time at Boston.
Yeah,
Think again. Think again. Boston seems
agreed.
to have a course that is designed to thwart you. It is designed to. Maybe it's just my experience, but every time I run Boston, I go, no, I don't really think I've done six now. I think I don't really think I've sort of mastered Boston. Maybe next year, and then you come next year, and it's 2018, or you
In
come
that way,
next year.
it's a lot like golf, right? You hit that one good shot and you think, but then you hit a bad shot and you're like, you did, but
Yeah,
you keep coming back, right? And I think with Boston, I found that let's talk about the weather a little bit because if you get it right, 2011, Liz, was a fantastic weather year. That's when
Hmm.
Ryan Hall ran a 2:04. That's when Jeffrey Mutai ran a 2:03
yeah,
and set the course record. It was a tailwind, a prevailing westerly, which serves runners well because you're running west to east, basically. And it was about 20 to 25 miles per hour, and the temperature was pretty good. Now, that happened also in 1975. In 1975, Bill Rogers ran a 2:09:55, and he stopped to tie his shoe, I believe, 3 or 4 times.
wow,
And still,
Wow.
and without super shoes, ran a 2:09:55. But they had ideal temperatures and they had 20 plus mile an hour tailwinds. That happens again from 1975 until now twice. So that's about a 4% chance of that happening. The other 96%, it's all over the place. Like your
Yeah.
2004, like 2018. So it's really tricky. And like you said, the course itself, forget about the weather, is a Rubik's Cube. It really is a
yeah,
very challenging course in so many different ways. And I break it up a certain way in the book that I could talk about, but it's tricky because you're hitting those hills at the exact same time your glycogen stores are depleted or pretty close to being depleted. And if you don't get your nutrition right and you're not ready for those hills and mentally locked in, you're in for a world of trouble. It's not going to be pretty.
yeah. You're referring to the Newton Hills. All of the advice I've listened to and watched, always says wait until you finish the last hill, and when you get off the last hill, release the hounds and race home. Well, I got to tell you, there is no racing home that happens as far as I'm concerned, because when you get off the last hill, you are toast and you still have 5 miles to run or something like that.
Yeah.
I have yet to get to the bottom of the last hill and go, oh, now it's time to open up the engine. I'm just a dead man walking by then usually. So let's hope this year's different.
I remember I was really excited when when I was going to run the Boston Marathon, because I didn't know very much about it, but I knew that the first like 10, I guess it's 10 miles are like downhill. And I love downhill. So I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And at the time I had a coach and he actually fed into this because he told me, oh, don't worry about Heartbreak Hill. It's not really that much of a hill anyway. So I went into the race. I had like very aggressive goals because I qualified with like 3:14, but my coach at the time thought that I was capable of a sub 3. And so that's what I had trained for. But all kinds of things like that. So my Boston was actually terrible. I ended up running like 20 minutes slower than my qualifier because I first of all, I think I overtrained because I was on the starting line. I was already tired. I was going down the hill. I was already tired. And then forget it. I got to like wherever those hills started. And there wasn't one, which I was ready for one heartbreak hill. But no, that's not how it works. There were several hills, so including Heartbreak Hill. I would have needed your handbook actually before my 2011 race.
It sounds like we had very similar races. So I ran 2011. I had in 2009 run a 3:03 in Maine, the sleepy little marathon in Portland, Maine. And I too was in your shoes. I was like, I'm ready to go sub 3. So I hit Wellesley at the half marathon in Wellesley in 1:31 in 2011.
Okay.
And as at that point, to your point, Alan, that I was like, I'm pretty wrecked. And this is not the way I should be feeling. So things really went, and despite the tailwind, things just went sideways. And when they did, I was mentally, I kind of just said, I kind of threw in the towel. And I ended up running 3:24 that year. So again, 1:31 at the half, 3:24. You do the math.
Yeah, that makes a really big positive split.
Yeah, that's not a pretty marathon.
No, you didn't have fun in the second half, that's for sure.
No, but one thing I learned, and I have yet to get it quite right, and we'll talk about that. But one thing I've learned is really the mental toughness at Boston is the most important thing, because it's one thing you could get through a flat marathon like Chicago and not be mentally locked in. In Boston, no chance. If you're not mentally locked in, and I mean really hyper focused on your goals and executing, you are going to be spit out the back end of that course. So I think that is a key. I could go into how I break down the course. It might be helpful.
Yeah, that would be useful.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you about that
could
next if you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So, any typical marathon, let's just pick on Chicago for a second. I love Chicago. I ran a sub 3 there. I have 3 C's, and the 3 C's are simple. The first 10 miles, you conserve. Conserve energy. And I mean conserve all kinds of energy, physical, mental, emotional, everything. You should feel like you're jogging, right? You should be close to your goal pace, but not too hyper concerned about it. You should be in the vicinity, cruising. I should say conserving. The second stage, miles 11 through 20, that's the cruise stage. That's where you lock into your pace, whatever it may be, and you are on autopilot. Like you are a pilot in the air at 30,000 feet having a cappuccino. You are just hitting those splits over and over perfectly. And then when you get to mile 20, from 21 to 26.2, that's where you compete. Because if you nailed the first 2, if you conserved and you cruised, you should be in position on a flat course to compete and just pick off people, not slow down, and if anything, pick it up, right? Take your energy level and press on the gas like a crescendo through the finish. Sounds good on paper, right? So those are the 3 C's.
Right. Yeah.
Boston's a little different. So here's Boston. Boston, you have 4 C's. First one is the same. Miles 1 through 6 are somewhat downhill, and that's where you're going to conserve. You should feel like you're jogging. You should feel like you're just warming up. From miles 7 through 15, which is when you go down, 15 is when you go down that hill leading into the Newton Hills, right? Right before the overpass. That is where you're going to cruise, because it's not flat, but it's rolling, gentle rollers. So that is your chance to cruise and lock in on your goal pace. And if anything, find some people to share the work, right? When you hit the Newton Hills, and that happens not where a lot of people think it is at the firehouse, it actually happens before the overpass over the highway. It's called Hell's Alley. That is where you're gonna do the C that's different here in Boston, and that is control. So you want to control your effort from mile 16 through the top of Heartbreak at 21. And that control is you're gonna throw pace out the window and just focus on your effort. Then, Alan, what you want to do when you get to the top, like you said, you're gonna feel wrecked. Nobody feels great. Believe me, nobody. The elites don't feel great. You're not going to feel great. Nobody's going to feel great. But when you're at the top at 21, if you've executed those 3 perfectly, then you should have a little something. You're going to feel wrecked, but you should have a little something, and that's where you compete. And if I were to take both of you and say, hey, it's a fresh day, we haven't run yet, why don't we go out and see how fast we can run the last 5 miles of Boston? You would rip it. It is a fast 5 miles. You really would. So if you're in the right mental headspace, even though you're messed, you're not in great, you're wrecked a little bit, you can run those last miles fast. Just if you just keep your cadence and you're mentally locked in. So that's it. That's the 4 C's.
That sounds fantastic, except my performance usually has a 5th C, crash. which I invariably manage to do before I get to the end.
That is so good.
I only have one Boston experience, and I did have that 5th C, so I don't know, but that's not really, I don't know. I didn't have very much knowledge going. I didn't have this handbook, that's for sure.
Well, you have to run it more than once. Running it once it's tough to get it right. Running it once, it really is. I mean, it's nice to be naive, right? It is. It can be. It can work to your advantage, but I would say to really run your best, it requires a lot of knowledge of the course, and then taking that knowledge and mimicking the course in your training in whatever way you can, whether it's actual hills or taking your treadmill and putting it at an elevation during the right points, maybe running some, fast finish long runs where you find hills at the end and try to navigate those. All very helpful.
Yeah, I guess that also helps the mental toughness piece.
Let's talk a little bit about gear. You extensively go through a gear checklist, which is pretty useful actually. And I concluded at the end that basically you need everything from tropical jungle running to Arctic expedition equipment. But to try to, I'm gonna focus the context a little bit. What kind of gear should we be looking for in particular for Boston?
I tell you, I am fortunate because I live in Boston. This is Boston right over top. There's the Hancock Tower's there, and the Prudential Center is right there. And I don't have to pack a suitcase like other people do to get to the race.
You have your entire wardrobe.
Right. I can't even imagine what it would be like to pack a suitcase and think, what do I need? Because, the weather is all over the place. I don't know if you ran 2007, but 2007, Jim Cantori from the Weather Channel was there because signs were being ripped off buildings. And that was the only year. In 2018, they didn't talk once about not having the race. In 2007, they were talking about not canceling the race. And then the weather kind of shifted at the last second, and it was still a nor'easter, and the winds were still in your face. But I would argue that 2018 was far, far worse than 2007. The weather shifted at just the right moment. So to answer your question about gear, man, oh man, that is a tough one. That's why that list that I put together is so extensive. I went through every type of weather, wet, every, temperature from sub-zero to over 75 degrees. Less is more is what I've learned. You definitely want to stay warm in Hopkinton because your body, you're going to be out there a while, right? You get out there 7:30, and you're not going to start in some cases until 9:30, 10:30. You need to stay warm because you burn off energy and you go through your glycogen stores trying to stay warm. So it's
Mhm.
really, really important to stay warm. Bring garbage bags, bring blankets, whatever. You can discard it. They will donate it. It's okay. Then once the race starts, even in 2018, I learned as I was running, and a funny little anecdote there, it was the only Boston Marathon I ever ran where I wasn't racing it. I wanted to run it on behalf of, well, in honor of my mother who had passed away. And I said, 2018, I'm going to run for joy. and, you,
Oh boy.
and, and you know how that turned out.
Yeah,
So
I ran that.
even during that race where, like you said, I think it was 60% of the elite field dropped out and hypothermia was happening quite a bit. I was down to a singlet and shorts and calf sleeves. And I think I had a very, I had a small, I know I had arm sleeves as well. That was it, which was
Oh
kind of nuts.
wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would have died if I tried to complete
Yeah,
my run.
Alan ran in his garbage bag. That's what he told me.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned in the book, the all-purpose tool, the garbage bag, which I'm a great believer in. I always have these huge garbage bags, basically put a hole in the bottom and pull it over my head so my head pops out. Everything else is inside. One, it keeps you pretty dry. Two, it keeps you pretty warm because they're not very they don't breathe very much.
They're not
So
breathable.
if it's cold, it keeps you warm as well. So they're pretty useful items to have pre-race at Boston where there's a lot of waiting around.
Yep.
But what I found in 2018 is actually I wasn't motivated to take it off at all. And so I went into the corral with my garbage bag on. I started the run with my garbage bag on, thinking I'll wait till I get warm. I never got warm. I ran the whole marathon with my garbage bag on. And I wasn't the
You weren't
only one.
alone.
I saw quite a lot of other people still wearing their
Oh,
garbage bags.
right, right. No, that was I would say I would like to know the stat on that about how many actually finished with garbage bags on,
Yeah,
because I saw things that I never saw before, like shower caps, uh,
yeah,
Wow.
the rubber gloves, people wearing rubber gloves was interesting. I actually, was in garbage bags, but it was so violent with the rain that and I was walking in them and they had shredded. So I was just getting
yeah,
saturated anyway.
Oh wow.
But I will say, getting back to garbage bags for a second, even if it's not a cold, heinous weather year, they come in handy. Like if it's raining politely or something, just to put it on the ground and have something dry
yeah,
uh, to kind of
Yeah.
chill and relax on. And
yeah.
even on a hot year, ditto. It's nice to not be, have it with you for that purpose, and share them with other runners.
Yeah, if you want Alan's pro garbage bag tip, get a transparent see-through garbage bag. So then people can see your numbers. So when they're doing security checks for you, you don't have to keep lifting up your garbage bag. They can see your number through the garbage bag. There you go. I don't
I
think
like
that
that.
was in your book, Mark. I think you can have that one for free.
Mm.
That is a good one. I like it. There's the next edition. We're going to include that.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. I also think that if you're going to travel, if you're traveling and now you don't know what to wear, because now we're telling you that it could be anywhere from 5 degrees to like 35 degrees, I think pack all your warm weather clothes, because shorts are cheaper than tights if you have to buy some at the expo. So I
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I usually just bring everything, but yeah,
Game day
let's see.
decision. Game day decision. Bring everything. Choose in the morning.
One important thing to, getting back to the weather and the difficulties is this, because it's a point-to-point course and you're going from Hopkinton to downtown Boston, truly, having lived here for, 24 years now, there are different weather patterns in both of those areas. So it could be snowing
Wow.
sideways in Hopkinton, and it can be raining politely in Boston. That is very common. So another thing about Boston is, as a runner, whatever you feel, I'll give you an example. I was going to say, whatever you feel in Hopkinton, you may or may not feel in Boston. In 1976, the gentleman, Jack Foltz, who wrote the foreword for the book, he won the 1976 marathon called the Run for the Hoses. It was 100 degrees in Hopkinton. When they finished the race in Boston, it was 68. So if you have that type of day where you crest, Heartbreak Hill, you could feel a very different weather pattern. You could have wind in your face that you weren't feeling in Hopkinton. It really is tricky, especially if there are storms coming and going on race day. So that's another element of the Boston weather that's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, fun. I mean, I'm all for it being too warm. I'm okay with that. Like, I can handle sweating. I don't know though, 2018, that looked pretty miserable. And everybody that I know that's done it has either had to like prop somebody up that was, stumbling because they were hypothermic, or they were, running in garbage bags, or they couldn't feel their arms. Like, I mean, it just didn't seem like a lot of fun. I'm happy that I wasn't at that one. I'd rather be at the hot ones.
Yeah, but it's a badge of honor, 2018. I was there.
Yeah, it really is, because everybody that was there seems to have this bond.
It's so true. I was at the New York City Marathon at the Expo, and somebody was walking around. I was introducing, the book to some people. One gentleman in particular was wearing a 2018 jacket, and when you're wearing that jacket, you don't have to say a word because you know that whoever's wearing it has gone through hell and has come back and can live to talk about it. So it really is, this camaraderie among runners at Boston is huge because we all go through the qualification process, or even with charity runners, you're raising a lot of money. There's a lot of, you feel a kinship with everybody that you're running with. Never more so than 2018, where the weather was just so bad. And I remember people on the course literally just, yelling at the top of their lungs out of sheer insanity because the wind would hit us, and it just stands you up. And it got to the point where it was almost comical.
Talking about people yelling, one of the things that I was told when I did my first Boston is, oh, you'll get to experience the Scream Tunnel at Wellesley College. For people who haven't done Boston, could you try to describe that for them?
Yes, it is fantastic. And it's been going on amazingly since the beginning, since 1897, when some Wellesley College girls, students, were cheering for a Harvard gentleman who was running. That's when it began, and they've been doing it year after year. The most amazing thing, I think, is you're going through a little quiet period after Natick as you enter Wellesley, and you can hear it. You can hear it before you see it. You can hear it a good quarter mile before you even see a thing. And then when you're in it, you can choose what to do with it, because it can be overwhelming. And it's the one time that I tell people in the book that you want to focus on your turnover, your cadence, and you want to do it because probably going too fast and you want to back off. It's the only time in the race that I would say that you need to think about going slower, because you get so amped up as you're moving through this wall of sound. And if you have your name, in a Sharpie written on your chest, they'll be yelling your name, and it's quite a rush to hear hundreds of girls scream your name at the same time. It doesn't happen in my life a lot. I'm not one of the Beatles. I'm not Taylor Swift. But it is kind of that same rush that you're going to get. And then another thing that you need to think about as a runner is it is so euphoric. And once you leave it and you're into Wellesley proper and you hit the halfway point, you go into a much quieter place, and it can be jarring. All that energy that was just, was given to you is gone now. And it can be disconcerting. It can really put you in a negative spiral mentally. And you need to be aware that all that energy that they gave you, you need to kind of bottle it up, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember much from Boston, but I do remember the Scream Tunnel. And I remember running and then hearing this rumbling. It would just sound like rumbling or something in the distance, and it took a long time to get there. That's how loud they were. But then when I got there, it was really loud. But it was like, for me, I think it was like overwhelmingly loud, like, because I'd never experienced that before. I never did. That was like my first, I mean, I did Montreal Marathon. It's just nowhere near the size of Boston Marathon. I mean, Montreal Marathon has maybe, I don't know, 3,000 marathoners. Boston has like 30,000 marathoners. So yeah, so it was like a whole different experience for me. Speaking of experience, you mentioned in the book about action cameras because, you know, we are in this era where, you know, content creators run races, they do the vlogs about them, but apparently the BAA discourages the use of action cameras like GoPros. Do you know why? And, you know, could anything happen to you if you post the video?
Yes, it's interesting because they do discourage them, yes, and they can. I know some people who have posted video on YouTube and they had to pull it down because the BAA literally came after them.
Okay.
But at the, I've also seen footage that people have posted on YouTube that hasn't been pulled. So I can't say that I know exactly the enforcement strategy of the BAA, but I
Okay.
can say that if you're going to bring a GoPro, it would behoove you to reach out to the BAA in advance, right? And if you don't do that, be fully aware that whatever footage that you capture, you're probably not going to be able to monetize it or post on a public forum. If they give you the green light, well, then, of course, that's great. If you're going to do it on the sly and you're going to post it and you're going to not listen to the BAA, then my advice would be to lawyer up.
Okay.
I say
That
that
would discourage
tongue in cheek.
anybody.
And it's not, listen, that the BAA, they have, I don't envy them in a lot of ways because they have so many stakeholders that are involved in the race, from the towns to the brands to the runners themselves to the spectators. They have to make everybody happy. And I know from experience, you mentioned that you were in, pharma, Alan. I was in the financial services industry working at a company doing a lot of work with pharma companies, helping executive teams monetize their shares and working with attorneys all over the place. And making everybody happy is very difficult. So the BAA needs to figure out, in a lot of different ways, policies like that, and drawing the line for one person versus another person. That's tough. And I don't fully understand, the lines that are being drawn, but I do understand that they can't have their precious brand. If they feel it's violated in any way, then, I think it's in it's their right to reach out and take that footage down.
I think one of the things as athletes, we sort of look to the BAA and kind of feel is that they're extremely hard-nosed about things like deferrals and refunds. It's like you pay your money, we'll try to give you a race. If you can't come, that's kind of on you. Or you got injured, too bad. You have a try to qualify for next year. Thank you for your money. That's kind of they're pretty hard-nosed and unwavering. Are there any instances at all where actually Boston will give you a refund or a deferral?
Yes, if you qualify and you get pregnant, then you can reach out to the BAA and get a deferral. If you were pregnant, had your child, and you're obviously incapable of running weeks or months after that, and you reach out to the BAA, they will grant you a deferral.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that is a recent thing, and they have also done things like, mothers who are nursing. They have nursing centers in Hopkinton and that type of thing. So they're constantly listening. They are constantly listening to the community, the greater Boston ecosystem, if you will. and finding ways to make the race better and better. But you are right. Historically, the BAA was very deferral unfriendly. And I think they're finding ways to move away from that. And that's a good thing.
I mean, I guess to their defense, like deferrals is one thing, but they can't have you like transferring your bib to people, because I mean, if you have to qualify, then you could transfer your bib to anybody afterwards. Like, then that wouldn't really be fair. So I guess that would be why you can't just sell your bib, or that kind of thing. But at least they're revising their policy on deferrals, so that's good.
That is good. Okay, no, I was gonna say that's a good segue into the 10 Commandments of Boston Marathon etiquette, which I put in the book. And one of the things is around bibs, right? Thou shalt not, share your bib or defile your bib, as I believe how I put it. But there are so many ways to cheat, right? Not just at Boston, but in marathons and races in general, bib mules and that type of thing. So you really, that bib is sacred, absolutely, sacred, especially the Boston bib. And I think they're absolutely in the right if anybody were to not run the race with their own bib or do anything to cheat the race, and disrespect the integrity of the race. They should be banned. Absolutely.
One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that you're not allowed to take a photograph of your bib, like a clean photograph of it, where you can see all of it and publish it, because people could, I guess, copy your bib and then band it.
I think it's happened.
It has.
It's happened.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a interesting, a few years ago, there was a wife of a prominent CEO who ran the race, the Boston Marathon, with a bib that the kind that you just described, where they took a photo and they mimicked the bib and wore the bib. And then when you see the race photos, it really works against you, because then you have the race photos that everybody gets, and you have two people with the same bib.
Yeah.
Oh no, yeah.
It's an imperfect way of cheating. Let's put it that way.
Something that's near and dear to our club's heart, in your 10 Commandments, is, let me see if I can find it here. Do not wear the merchandise before race day. We had a guy in our club who, at the Toronto Marathon a couple of years ago, he turns up at the pre-race warm-up wearing
No, it was the pre-race pasta dinner, and he was wearing the shirt.
Wearing the race shirt. And we all went, get back. What are you doing? And he didn't seem to know this rule.
He wasn't aware.
Yeah, I think I make the analogy in the book, I'm pretty sure I do, about that. The equivalent of that in baseball is there's an unwritten rule where if your pitcher is throwing a no-hitter and it's late in the game, 6th, 7th, even the 5th inning, you just do not talk to the pitcher, period. You let him come in and you let him sit down and you don't talk to him. The worst thing you could do, and the equivalent of wearing race merch before the race, would be to sit down with your pitcher, not only talk to him, but say, hey, you have a no-hitter going.
As if he doesn't know.
It's just, right, not something you want to do. And I also say in the book, the other thing that you want to steer clear of, above and beyond wearing year of merch before the race, I have a thing about the finish line itself. You can take a picture before the race around it, in close vicinity of it, but do not stand on the finish line in advance of running through the finish line on race day.
That's reserved for getting to the end of the marathon, basically.
Yeah.
Correct.
Bad luck.
Correct.
Actually, since we're talking about before the marathon, let's talk about the expo, because I don't really remember much of it, like from when I went in 2011. In your book, you actually say there are like over 200 exhibitors. That's pretty much a marathon in itself. And you give actually a whole lot of things you can visit in Boston and stuff like that. And then you say that
Don't tire yourself out.
because we're gonna be tired for the marathon. So maybe like, do you have any must-see things at the expo that you think people should absolutely go see or make a point to look for?
Yeah, it's changed. I'll tell you this. The expo used to be larger. Quite frankly, it was everybody went to the expo because that's where all the brands were. In recent years, it's actually changed quite a bit. Adidas has the sponsor of the race, obviously, has this massive, right, area where you enter the expo and you're in this. It seems like it's almost a third of the entire expo is Adidas. Other brands, what they've done recently is they have pop-up shops close to the expo on Newbury Street, which is a beautiful part of Boston in the Back Bay. And so it's not at the expo. So a lot of the vendors have moved out of the expo and they're actually off site, but close by. So I would say, a few things about the expo. Number one, you're not going to find everything there that you used to. And that also includes, if you walked around the expo in the 2003, you were getting freebies handed out left and right. And when COVID happened, that kind of stopped all that. So it's not like you're going to get a lot of free, swag that you would typically would have gotten 2 decades ago. Another thing is, it seems like some of the major shoe brands have moved off site. So Asics was on Newbury Street, Brooks with Des Linden was on Newbury Street. So some of the shoe opportunities you're not going to find at the expo anymore. I think you need to be careful about how much time you spend on your feet, right? So the expo is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If I were to give any advice, and the advice that I gave in the book is steer clear of it on Sunday, because you're going to spend so much time in your feet that you're really giving up precious seconds on race day if you're there too long. So try to get there Friday and Saturday. And then because of the way it is nowadays, not everything is at the expo. So you're gonna have to do some more walking around Boston to find the other places. But it makes it interesting. I'll tell you this, and this is a book story, really. My network of runners and the running community isn't massive. And I had a lot of people, as you've seen, contribute to the book. And I found a lot of them literally walking the streets of Boston. I was walking down Newbury Street and Dathan Ritzenhein was having a coffee all by himself. And I introduced myself. And that's how I got Dathan Ritzenhein to contribute to the book. Kara Goucher I met also on Newbury Street. The list goes on and on. It's amazing how many elites and luminaries, and dignitaries of Boston you'll find just walking down the street, and they're friendly. They'll talk to you. It makes it special.
That's amazing. Another place that you actually mentioned that in the book, and this was specifically if you have to do your shakeout run, is the Charles River. That apparently you can go there and you see all kinds of famous runners like Eliud Kipchoge, for example, doing their shakeout. So why is this one so popular? Why do all the runners go there to run? I think that might have been where I did my shakeout, but because I knew nothing about Boston at the time, I'm actually not quite sure.
Yeah, no, first of all, it's a running oasis. It's gorgeous. It's flat and it's in the Back Bay. It's right there. So it's very easy. All the people that are there in hotel rooms in that vicinity can just go right to the Charles River and run on the Charles. And that's why I put the 20 golden rules of running along the Charles River in the book, because there is an etiquette of running on that path on the Esplanade. And you really want to be careful because you could get run over by somebody on a bike or an electric bike, and that would not be fun. Des Linden, I remember last year, was just doing a shakeout. One of the people that contributed to the book that I thought here's the way it happened. Lona Salpeter, who won the Tokyo Marathon, and she finished 3rd last year at Boston. She was running right ahead of me, and I didn't even know who she was at the time. but I introduced myself and I told her about the book, and her eyes just lit up. She was so excited. And I was like, whoa, this is incredible. I said, would you want to contribute? She's like, absolutely. So she gave me her email, and I thought, she is going to go back to, Kenya, and I am never going to see her again. And when she got third the following day, I thought, never am I going to hear from her. And sure enough, I reached out to her after the race, congratulated her, and via email from wherever she was in the world, she sent back her quote for the book, and I was just blown away. So yeah, it happens. Like Bill Rogers, you'll see Bill Rogers running along the river. He's there or years ago, he was there quite a bit. So it is amazing. Kipchoge is in there. He was running along the river. I put it akin to, I also live quite a bit in New York City, and Central Park is kind of like that. But I would say because Boston's a little smaller, the city's just the right size for this race. It's one of the things that makes it special, that you'll see even more runners along the river or along the Charles.
Amazing. So it seems to me that quite a lot of people, maybe it's just there are more stories about it, but it seems to me that there are more people who streak at Boston. And when I say streak, I don't mean taking your clothes off and running naked. I mean, basically repeat runs, sequential runs, consistently turning up every year. And we see people, we have a friend who has a jacket, which has all the years from 2010 or something till now embroidered on, and I
think
tease
it's
him
2008,
and I tease him every year because he always has the year embroidered before he completes the race, and I go, that's kind of a transgression of one of the 10 commandments. You're not allowed to embroider the year before you've done the race. And we always have a friendly discussion about it. It's kind of fun. It's friendly banter. But there seems to be a lot of people like that who have these coats with sequential years and streaks.
Yep.
Is that true?
It's amazing. I'll give you an example. I was talking to somebody the other day, and it was my school, my college, and I said that I had run it 18 times, and they said, whoa, that's just incredible. And I said, you know what? In the Boston area, in this community of Boston, which is has a massive running ecosystem, I am not an anomaly. In fact, I know many of my friends who have run 25, 30, 40. Dave McGilvery has run 51. I'm not going to say I'm on the lower side now, but it's funny how it happens. I think what happens at Boston, it's not just local people. It's people from near and far, and in foreign countries too. People speak with such reverence about this race. And of course, when you qualify, you almost feel a little obligation. And I think to your point, earlier, Alan, you've run multiple times, and you said you had some unfinished business. I think people feel the same way. The course is so tricky that it's hard to just go there and get it right and be done. Like I ran Chicago, I ran my first sub-3 in New York, and I ran New York once, and I ran Chicago once. Will I ever go back? Maybe, but I feel like my business is done there. Boston, my PR at Boston after 18 attempts is 3:11. I still have unfinished business at Boston. I'm a little old now, so I don't know if I'm going to be able and capable of pulling off such a thing, but I haven't gotten it right. I wrote the book on it. I do know everything there is. I know all the trade secrets. And yet what I've found for me is that it's very difficult to be in Boston. This kind of goes back to our earlier conversation. It's very difficult to be in Boston or Montreal or anywhere like we live and get the proper training in for that spring race. It's far easier for me to run a fall race and get it right. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
Are there any benefits from being a streaker?
There are. So if you run 10 in a row, you then just have to qualify. So you don't have to have any buffer at all. So if you qualified by a second and the buffer is 5 minutes, you're in because you're a streaker. And there's also, I believe, I could be wrong on this one, but I don't think I am. There's a quarter century club. So if you've run 25 in a row, I believe you don't even have to qualify. I could be wrong.
Okay.
I could be wrong. I don't I know there are many runners that have run over 25 that are in this exclusive club. Of course, you have to be healthy enough and you have to finish in under the 6 hour time. You can't just get
Okay.
out there for 13 hours. So they are going to cut you off. But if you're capable of running that 6 hour time or better, then you can continue your streak. So there are benefits for sure.
That's cool. I heard you just mention the name of Dave McGilvray. Dave McGilvray, for people who haven't heard the name, where have you been, first of all, if you haven't heard the name? And he's, I think he's
He has a
famous in
book.
my eyes for being the sort of organizer, the figurehead of the organization of the Boston Marathon. But he also has 51 completions of the Boston Marathon. So I have a couple of questions here. Does he have the most? Does he have the most completions? I don't think he does, but does he have the most? And how does he run the Boston Marathon when he's supposed to be organizing the thing? He surely can't be running it while he's supposed to be organizing it.
Correct. Great questions. So 51 is way up there. He's in the top 5, but there are 2 that have 54. One of them has since broken the streak. So the one who has 54, if he runs this year, will break it with 55. But there are many, and the women, let's not forget the women. The women, I believe, is at 37. So that's pretty up there too. But you'd be surprised how many people are in that 25, that quarter century club that I was talking about. I don't know what the exact number is, but when I looked at it last time, it seemed like there were over 50 names on that list.
Wow, that's a lot. It's a lot because most people only start running marathons later. So like, even just to get to that quarter century club, yikes. It's
It's remarkable.
if I started in 2025, I'd be plus 25 years. So I'd be like, I don't know, be like 70
68,
by the time I
something
get
like that.
there. 68, yeah.
Yeah,
Jeez.
still a spring chicken.
I guess,
There-
yeah, I guess that's not that old.
There you
Well, I
go.
wouldn't make it to 50 though.
I think you should get that streak started. So Dave McGilvray ran it first, like I did, as a bandit, and then he started running as a registered runner. And he ran, I want to say 15 or 16 of them, his initial ones, like everybody else. And then when his duties with the Boston Marathon became too great, obviously he's the race director now, he had to make a decision. And what he decided to do is he does everything all morning and all night and all year round to make this race great. And he truly is a remarkable human being. But after he's done with those duties, as best as he can do them during the day, race day, he goes out to Hopkinton and he runs back, typically with a mob of people around him, all the
Oh,
way back
wow.
in and finishes the race. So, funny little anecdote. The gentleman, Jack Foltz, I mentioned before, who won in 1976, he ran with Dave McGilvray one year at night. It's called the night run. It's a thing. So Dave McGilvray's night run, Jack Foltz was with him. And when they got to the finish line, Jack said, "You go ahead first." And Jack crossed last. So he's the only runner, to my knowledge, to ever win Boston and finish last at Boston.
Oh, there you go.
Wow, that's amazing. So I guess like the streets are open again once he runs it. He runs it like after everything is
Yes.
done. So he doesn't even have the benefit of having the aid stations and the streets closed.
I've never run it with him, but I imagine that people are out there in force still to help him because they know he's coming. And it's a thing that's been, very well documented and publicized. So that's another thing, getting back to the Boston Marathon running community, runners all year round, especially from January through April, we run the course all the time. So on any given Saturday, you will see thousands of runners on the course and you will see aid stations. So people are typically running from Hopkinton to Heartbreak Hill, especially that first 21 miles all the time. And, there are aid stations set up. So I have I'm certain that when Dave is running on race day, they've got some people handing him some things along the way.
I guess Dave's a famous, a famous name in the Boston history. One of the confusing things about the history of Boston is that there are two famous people called John Kelly.
Yes.
Like, what a coincidence. Who both won Boston at different times. One of which I think John the Elder seems to be, one of the foremost figures in Boston Marathon. Tell us about the John Kellys. Unravel that for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a little confusing. So John Kelly the Elder won the Boston Marathon twice. He started the race 61 times and finished it 58 times, but not as a streaker. And the most amazing thing is, I told you that he started 61. I think it was the first two or maybe three times he didn't finish the race. So even John the Elder Kelly, who is a legend in the Boston area, didn't finish Boston two or three times. John the Younger Kelly came along in the 50s, and obviously they had to be given these monikers because people would confuse them. And he was incredible. He won the race, I believe, once, and he won the U.S. Marathon Championship 8 successive times, I believe. So he, in his own right, was quite spectacular. John Kelly the Elder has a statue at mile 19, right at the base of the hill that precedes Heartbreak Hill. And of course, Heartbreak Hill, as you may know, was named after John the Elder Kelly. When he was running it, he was passing Tarzan Brown one year, and in so doing, on Heartbreak Hill, he tapped Tarzan Brown on the shoulder as if to say, I got this from here. And Tarzan Brown took offense to that and blew past Kelly, who ended up finishing 5th that year. And in the news the next day, Jerry Nason, I believe, was the person who coined it. He said that Johnny Elder Kelly's heart was broken that day.
On the
and
hill.
It became Heartbreak Hill from that point forward.
Okay, cool. And it's
So
gone through the world because, lots and lots of places have their own Heartbreak Hill these days.
Mhm.
Right.
So you mentioned a lot of personalities and that there's statues along the course, but there's also a Hall of Fame with all kinds of things on display. Like you can go and see Des Linden's like jacket and bib on display from what I saw from the photos from her win in 2018. Should people make a point of visiting the Hall of Fame? And if they have to do it before the marathon, is it worth the extra step count?
Okay. Great question. And here's my answer. I created this Hall of Fame. That is specific to the book. I felt it was the proper way to honor all of these legends. And I
That's
also have,
amazing. It
Wow.
should actually be a Hall of Fame.
there should be. Maybe this is the beginnings of that happening. And I also,
That section is amazing.
oh, you like the section? Okay.
I like
That's
that
great to
section.
hear. Right after that section, I also have charity legends. So there are a few names that I put in the charity legends, but I believe they should have their own, area in the book that honored them. But that's an interesting point. So some of those things, the BAA, and there's a woman, her name is Gloria Roddy, who has assembled, and she's not alone, but she was one of the ones that has the largest collection of memorabilia of the Boston Marathon. So there's no doubt in my mind you could have a physical walk-in facility that has not only the memorabilia, but all these great legends, almost like you're walking through Cooperstown and looking at the Hall of Fame for baseball. I kind of love that idea. I would love to be a part of that. But I did this specifically for readers like you who might want to know, who these people are and a little bit about them. And if you notice the descriptions, I had some fun. They're pretty playful descriptions of each of the characters. So it's not as straightforward as maybe a Hall of Fame might look, but it certainly has that.
You need to put it together. That's so disappointing. I wanted to go see the Hall of Fame when I register in 2025.
I think it's a great idea, and I might have to somehow
Put that
make that
together.
happen.
No pressure, no pressure. I mean, the statues are all along the course. Like specifically remember because I used to kind of follow them a lot, the Hoyt father and son duo that
Yeah,
would
Vic and
do
Rick.
triathlons. Yeah, I was really sad when I was sad when the dad passed away because I was like, oh no, like the son is all alone. He's not going to do any more triathlon. And then I think he passed away later.
Yep, they
Yeah.
both they did yeah, they both passed away. What an incredible story, right? I mean, I it blows my mind every time I hear it about how that
And
all
they have a
happened. But
statue.
they have a statue in Hopkinton, pretty close to the start line, yeah. And they still have a Hoyt Foundation, and they have what they call duo teams. So these duo teams, I don't know how many they have now, but I think it's like 10 or more that run the race every year, which is really cool. And they're raising money, for the foundation. But I remember, like you said, I remember passing them in the race. And the most amazing thing to me was Dick Hoyt ran his initial marathon. He had to qualify to do it. They said, you need to qualify. And I think at the time, he had to run a sub 250 to qualify. So he did that, and he practiced with I think a sandbag of like 130-pound sandbag in, a push. And then they've done, beyond the Boston Marathon, they've done Ironman triathlons together. Just, yeah.
I've seen those videos. I mean, it's unbelievable because, I think anybody that finishes an Ironman is pretty determined and pretty spectacular because you have to swim 4 kilometers, but he swims 4 kilometers with like a little boat that he's pulling in the back, and he's swimming, and his son is in the boat, so he's got to pull this boat, and I just I can't even imagine. And then he does everything by himself, like he hoists his son out of the boat and puts him in the bike, whatever. Yeah, it's one, emotional to watch because they give you all the clips of the different stages, but like, wow, I mean, that's dedication.
If you're not a crier, that'll get you there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I am. So I try not to watch those things more than once. It's like, okay, if I've seen it, like, it's okay. I don't need to watch it again because I'm just gonna, it's like the waterworks.
Right. But that's the Hoyts are such a great example of the Boston Marathon has so many incredible personalities that have run the race and are involved in the race, and it just makes the history is so rich that the fact that you're taking that left-hand turn onto Boylston and you're in the footsteps of Meb Keflezighi and Bill Rogers and Catherine Nareeba, who won 4 Boston marathons, and the list goes on, is special, right? It's just emotions bubble up to the surface for me in a way that they haven't in other races. It kind of brings that out for sure.
Do you cry your eyes out while you're running down Boston, Mark? Confess, there are not millions of people listening, but there are hundreds and hundreds of people listening. So,
yeah, okay, that's a great question, and I'm going to give you a not so great answer for somebody who wrote the book on the Boston Marathon. The only time I've ever cried in a race was in 2016 at the New York City Marathon when I ran my first sub 3. And in so doing, I was behind. I had hit the half at 1:30:15. I knew I was behind schedule. I came into Central Park, which is around mile 23, and somebody yelled, "You got this, Marco." And my mother had passed away months before, and she called me Marco. And when I heard that, I was looking up at the sky when I heard it.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, my legs were running at like 6:10 pace. And I ran the last 3 miles faster than any other mile that I'd run and finished in 2:58:49. And I got across the finish line and just tears, just bawling. Never forget it. Yeah.
I'm sniffling a little bit. I'm sniffling here a little bit just listening to you.
Oh, it was so magical. also another reason why I won't run that race again is because I put that moment in a glass case, like Holden Caulfield in The Catcher in the Rye,
Mm.
walking through the
Mhm.
museum. You want to just capture it and never taint it. That's kind of the way I feel about that. But Boston, Boston, what I love most about Boston is every year is different. Every year, the weather, it's where I'm at as a human being leading into the race, what
Mhm.
stage of life I'm in. So much is different, and I've experienced it again and again and again. So my emotions that come out on race day are very different, wildly different on a year-to-year basis, and they're special. They're very, very intense, and that is something that is near and dear to me.
I think it would be worth talking a little bit about that 20% charity runners, because in the book you actually mentioned that there could sometimes be some hard feelings towards charity runners because they get in, they don't have to qualify, even though they're raising all this money for a good cause. But have you ever experienced that yourself, where I don't know, you felt like less deserving or something like that, or that, not looked at in the same light as a qualifier because you were running
Yeah,
Boston for charity instead?
it really is interesting. I would think, speaking for just throwing a statement out there, I'll say that there are some people who feel that charity runners shouldn't be involved at all. I am certainly not one of those people. The BAA long ago had said in their statements, this is not something they say today, that this is not a jogger's race. That's what they said. And they started to implement the qualifying standards in 1970, and it's turned into a different thing than what it was. And then, of course, charity runners came on the scene in 1989, and that's when some of the people that qualified felt like they were missing. They weren't getting spots because charity runners were filling those spots because there's only so many people that can participate in the race. I don't believe that. I mean, I have run for charities and I know the good that they do. They raise on average over $40 million a year, and the money that they raise does things like cure cancer, literally, and also support different treatments and research for these diseases. And I know all the good that they do, and I know that the Boston Marathon, the heart of it is not just about elite runners or qualified runners, because the heart of the race, there's a party going on in the back with these charity runners that is phenomenal. And they're situated in the last waves, the last corrals of the final wave. So they're all together. So it's almost like in the Boston Marathon, there are two races unfolding at once, right? You have the elites and you have the qualified runners running for PRs and BQs, and then you have the charity runners running because they're running on behalf of a patient partner who has cancer or a family member. And it just makes the race special, and I would never want to take either one of those away, right? People are going into the race with a different purpose, and they're fulfilled in different ways by crossing that finish line.
Also, I think that sometimes because we're runners and, we are runners who an ambition to qualify for Boston, we tend to think about the race from a runner's perspective. But in fact, there's a specific group of people called elite marathoners or fast marathoners who are commandeering the whole of Boston City for a weekend. And if you're not a runner, that's pretty darn inconvenient. That's and you get this in places like Montreal, who are not so Boston oriented, New York orientated. In smaller cities that have a big city marathon, you get a lot of people who say, well, it's pretty inconvenient. I can't drive my car over the bridge to get to the city, mumble, mumble. And you get bad blood developing, bad atmosphere developing alongside the people who are all pro the race and health and running. You get all these people who have got nothing to do with running, who just grumble all the time that their city's gotten really inconvenient for a weekend for them, and they have to get to work or whatever. And I think a great way of getting past all of that is the charity events, because then you can turn around and say, look, this weekend where you may be totally disinterested in running, but this weekend is raising 40 million bucks for worthy causes. Don't be such a don't be such a miserable person
Yeah.
saying, oh, it's inconvenient, you can't get across the road. You're gonna have to walk down down the block. Think about that.
Yeah.
And that's a great way of putting the marathon into perspective for the whole of the city, for the whole of the population, rather than dividing it between, oh, I'm not a runner, why would I be interested? It's rather inconvenient.
Yeah, I was just going to say I was a spectator last year at the Montreal Marathon because we had a teammate doing it, and you wouldn't believe how many like angry drivers I saw on my, I'd run from one area to the other because it's like the best way of spectating a marathon. If you're a runner, you just run from one place to the other. And I mean, there are some people that were like truly angry. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of those, because Montreal Marathon, it sort of like stopped existing, and it went under a new organization, so it's like revived again. I don't know how much charity running is done, but it's actually a great way to sell the marathon, I guess, to everybody else that doesn't run, because runners, we love it, but the other people don't love it.
Right. No, in addition to the charity runners, I think what makes Boston special is the fact, again, it's not a Saturday or a Sunday race. It's Marathon Monday. It's Patriots Day. So the entire city and the entire state, they have the day off. It is a holiday. And it is a party atmosphere from the beginning, from your whatever you're drinking in the morning, your Bloody Marys in the morning, to the Fenway, Park crowd that spills out after that game is over, the baseball game, which begins at 11 o'clock. Those fans spill into Kenmore Square, but you really do feel the entire weekend, quite frankly, that you're involved in a really special party, and the velvet rope has been lifted for you. I think you feel it Saturday, you feel it Sunday, and then on race day, I can tell you, just walking the streets of Hopkinton, as you've done, everybody out there is so friendly, and people, in downtown Boston, or people that are on the outside looking into Boston, there are these expressions like, oh, I'll say it, massholes, or they were cold New Englanders, right? We're these Bostonians that are rigid and Puritan. These are words that you hear a lot. And the reality is the Boston Marathon being here brings out the best of this great city. Truly does, in so many different ways. And the charity teams and the charity runners are just one part of that. And it's literally a feeling that you can't escape that entire weekend.
It is true. I remember at one point during the one Boston I did, where I was feeling pretty darn miserable, and there's a kid that handed me a licorice, and I can't even tell you where that was, but I was like, well, whatever, I'm just going to take the licorice because heck, I'm not running very well anyway. Maybe this is going to give you a little boost. But and then I can't, like, my body was just hurting so much, and I went through one of these neighborhoods, and you describe all these neighborhoods in detail in your book. And I remember reading about like the neighborhood where the people are giving Advil. I remember there was a lady with a pot of Vaseline, some popsicle sticks, and a bottle of Advil. And I took some of her Advil because I was just feeling so miserable at that point.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's so great because I mean, they're obviously not part of the race organization. They just come out, and they come out with their families, and they're giving out stuff from their pantries and their pharmacies, that, they had to buy with their own money. It's almost like, it's like all of these people are just completely embracing that weekend, which is like
And the
fantastic.
guys at Boston College will give you a beer as well if you're that way oriented. I know you're not a beer
Yeah.
person,
Yeah.
but
I
I
don't
know
like
I
beer,
didn't
but
notice the popsicle sticks. I noticed the beers.
Yeah, no, that you'll smell the beer as you go down the backside of Heartbreak Hill into Boston College. You can smell it. It's just intense.
Mm.
They actually have some of the students there have a thing. It's a marathon of their own where they try to drink 26 beers in the 24 hours.
Oh, that's
It's
messy.
actually a thing.
That sounds
So
awful,
that
actually.
it does sound pretty awful, but that might explain, if you look at the Wellesley girls, they look like they're put together pretty well and they're dressed prim and proper. By the time you get to Boston College, they look a little disheveled. They look
Yeah.
like, kind of zombie-like in and of themselves. And they're usually in sweatpants and t-shirts with solo cups. It's a different vibe.
Okay, so we should move on to our summaries, but before we get to our summaries, maybe we should ask you what's the best way for people, what do you suggest people should do to get a hold of a copy of your book, Mark?
Yeah, great question. So it's available anywhere books are sold. If you go into your favorite bookstore and you don't see the book there, request the book. They will find it. Uh, if you're looking for sheer speed and you don't have a problem with Jeff Bezos and the fact that he might control the world someday,
Yeah.
I would go with Amazon because they will get the book to you to your doorstep next day. Barnes and Noble also a good choice. But if you have that favorite local store, by all means, go to it. I would suggest you do those and your local library. And if your library doesn't have it, definitely bring up the name and tell them to order the book, and they will do that. So you can go out there and you can champion the book and share it with your friends. And I think the most important thing for the book, since it's a new thing to this world, we're 20 some days in, is if you like the book, you read the book, you enjoy it, tell people about it, because the best thing you could do for any book, whether it's running book or not, is to share that with other friends and family and just let people know. And that word of mouth is so important to the success of a book.
For sure. And we believe that. That's what we're doing here, spreading the word.
This is, yeah, and it's I again, getting back to what I said earlier, I think the world of you for so many different reasons, but the way that you celebrate authors.
If people want to follow you on social media or get in contact with you or just see what you're up to, how do they do that?
Yep. So my website is my hub. It's just markwpollina.com. But I'm on Instagram. If you look at my Instagram, it's pretty much nothing but running posts, which is probably what you're looking for.
Great.
Yeah, it's a good thing to
Right?
follow, I think. Yeah.
For sure. And Facebook, I'm on Facebook. Twitter, not so much. Threads is getting kind of up and coming, but yeah, I'm all over on social. If you're looking for more information on Mark, probably the best place to go, and then you can branch out from there is just to go straight to my website, which is again markwpollina.com.
Great stuff.
Sounds good. Yeah.
So should we do our summaries?
Yes, we should.
Okay, the Boston Marathon Handbook by Marc W. Pollina. Well, first of all, I would say this book brings back all my Boston memories. So I just relived all my 6 Bostons, and that alone is worth the price of admission. So if you've done a Boston and you think, oh, well, I've done Boston, why would I read a book about Boston? You darn well should. Go and everybody who's done a Boston Marathon should go and get this book and have a browse through it. You get a vivid recollection coming back to you. There's also a good deal of info that I had no idea about. I didn't know about the various statues, even though I've probably run past them all, but laser focused on the road ahead. So, for example, didn't know anything about those. A lot of the history I knew a little bit about, but it was great to get the details filled in on that. The style of the book is humorous, which is fun. It's sort of, there's some tongue-in-cheek and some sort of slightly humorous angles to it, which makes it fun. Also, it features a whole series of famous Boston characters throughout, in terms of people giving their quotes about the marathon or about aspects of it, or historical aspects of it. I won't go into examples of that because I'll be here forever. There are literally probably hundreds. I would say the book's a must-have if you're planning your first Boston. As Liz said, she wished she had it before she did her first one, and you would wish that you'd had it before your first one. So if you're planning your first Boston, get this book. It'll help you a lot, and also just psych you up if you need any more psyching up. But also, if just you'd like to do Boston one day, or you're kind of interested in Boston, or you wonder what all the fuss is about with respect to Boston, it's worth getting this book, and then you'll probably go, aha, now I see what all the fuss is about. Or you may go, aha, now I didn't know whether I wanted to do Boston, but now I want to. So be aware that if you buy the book, it may incur some additional training and additional charges to get a Boston entry. So great stuff.
You might also need a gym membership so that you can use a treadmill. That's
In
just an
winter.
aside. I'm just going to actually echo off of what Alan just said about all the info that I had no idea about. And the one thing that really stuck out at me was when Mark talks about running past a body of water in one of the cities. And I was like, I definitely didn't see any lake anywhere. And so that was a complete surprise. So actually, I think even if you've run this race like before, you could still get the book, and then you can look out for all these things that are apparently there that nobody saw, because I didn't see, and even just Alan confirmed that he has no idea that he was running past any body of water. So yeah, that's my first reaction when I started reading the book was like, why wasn't this written in 2011 when I did Boston? Because, at the time I qualified, there was a bit of a hint that it was special because there were some other people that were entering, and I ended up, entering because they entered, and I didn't really understand until much later that it's such a sought after thing to be able to go to Boston because of the qualifier. So I kind of wish I had the book, because I would have opened my eyes a bit more, and maybe like even just the expo and the statues that are around, to know that like they actually mean something and they're related to the marathon. I mean, it's amazing how much a city can embrace an event, and this is one event that's really well embraced by the city that puts it on. I loved how every section was peppered with stories and quotes from runners that have run Boston, and you see that there's all different kinds and different reasons. So that was really great. And like Mark mentioned, there's all kinds of cute sections about things like the Hall of Fame and the 10 Commandments and all those kinds of things, and the rules of running along the
Charles River.
The Charles River. I was going back up in the notes. I'm like, what's the name of that river again? You see, I think I need to go to Boston a few more times.
You do.
So I guess it just behooves us to say thank you incredibly for your time, Mark, and thank you for this book.
On behalf of all the other runners that are running this year, thanks for this book, because I think there'll be a lot of people that benefit from it.
Thank you. I say one thing at the end of the book, and I'll say it now because it's pertinent, and that is, there's an educator, and he said that the best way to learn an important thing is not to sit in a room and listen to somebody lecture about that thing. It's to literally take the important thing and put it in the middle of the room so everybody can gather around it and they can learn from it together. And that's what I wanted to do with this book, so that everybody that gathers around this great race, they can establish their own emotional connections to it. And that's why I wrote it in second person, so you literally feel like you're in the race as you're moving through the book. So thank you for your time. You're both amazing. I told you you're deities to me. And I appreciate you hosting me on your wonderful podcast that I'm now a big fan of.
Great stuff.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate your time as well.
All that remains is for Liz to do the outro for us. and see whether she can persuade somebody to give us a 1-star review on Spotify.
Fine, I won't say the 1 star this time. I'm just giving people options. You want reviews or you don't want reviews? Thanks for listening to another episode of Running Book Reviews. Big thank you to the publisher, Rowan and Little Publishing Group, for providing a review copy of the book. And big thanks to Marc for spending time with us today. If you'd like to leave us feedback about how we can improve the podcast or want to suggest a book that you'd like for us to review in a future episode, you can leave us a comment on social media. We are Running Book Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter, we are reviews_running. Please also follow us on social media to find out about new episodes when they're released, or you can just subscribe to the podcast on your favorite streaming platform. If you've been listening to us for a while and are wondering how you can help us out, there are a few ways. If you're enjoying the podcast, spread the word. Tell your friends about us or share a link to your favorite episode with a running partner. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if this is how you listen to your podcast. You can also rate us on Spotify out of 5 stars. I'm not going to mention that you can give us 1 star, but you've probably heard that in another episode. We're also on Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy us a coffee if you like, but you can also just go there and sign up to follow us, because if we post anything, then you'll get a little email from us. So that's it for now. Bye.
Bye.